Staff Sergeant Kira Valdez heard the radio crackle at dawn. Sergeant Martinez never returned from his perimeter check. We've lost contact completely. 6 hours later, following his trail across the Afghan mountainside, she would discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones shooting at you, but the ones wearing the same uniform who want you to disappear without a trace. Staff Sergeant Kira Valdez knelt beside the final set of boot prints at the edge of the 1,000-foot drop that marked the eastern boundary of forward operating base Granite. The November wind cut through the Afghan mountains with a bite that made tracking difficult, but these prints told a story that didn't match the official report she'd been given. At 27, Kira served as the base's primary tracker and reconnaissance specialist, skills developed through childhood hunting trips with her Apache grandfather in the mountains of Arizona. Her ability to read terrain, follow trails, and understand how people move through dangerous landscape had made her invaluable during 8 years of military service across 3 deployments. Sergeant Carlos Martinez had been missing for 18 hours after failing to return from a routine security patrol along the base's perimeter. The initial search had focused on areas where insurgent activity was most likely, but Kira's examination of the evidence suggested something entirely different had happened to her fellow soldier. Martinez was known for his meticulous attention to detail and strict adherence to safety protocols. The idea that he would approach the cliff edge without proper equipment or backup went against everything she knew about his character and training. Something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong to her experienced instincts. The base commander had assigned her to conduct what he called a final sweep before officially declaring Martinez missing in action, but Kira suspected there were aspects of this case that weren't being shared with the investigation team. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so to hear more stories of veterans who discovered that the truth sometimes requires courage to uncover, especially when that truth challenges everything you've been told to believe. Kira's tracking abilities had been inherited from her grandfather, Thomas Valdez, a former Army Ranger who'd spent decades guiding search and rescue operations in the Southwest. He'd taught her that footprints, broken branches, and disturbed soil could tell stories more accurate than witness testimony, and that reading sign properly required understanding both the terrain and the psychology of the person being tracked. Her grandfather had been a code talker during World War II, serving in the Pacific Theater, where his ability to navigate unfamiliar terrain and track enemy movements had saved countless lives. He'd passed down techniques that combined traditional Apache tracking methods with military reconnaissance skills, creating a unique expertise that few soldiers possessed. When Kira enlisted, her natural abilities had been enhanced by specialized training in combat tracking, battlefield forensics, and reconnaissance operations. She'd spent her first deployment teaching other soldiers how to read terrain and follow trails, skills that proved invaluable in mountainous regions where conventional surveillance was impossible. Her relationship with Martinez had developed over 2 years of working together on patrol operations. He was a methodical soldier who understood the importance of following procedures and maintaining communication protocols. They developed mutual respect based on complementary skills, his attention to detail, and her ability to read landscape and human behavior. But this tracking assignment felt different from routine search operations. The urgency in the commander's voice when he'd briefed her suggested that Martinez's disappearance was more complicated than a simple navigation error or equipment failure, and that finding him quickly was important for reasons beyond normal concern for missing personnel. The official investigation into Martinez's disappearance was being conducted by Captain Blake Morrison, the base intelligence officer who'd arrived from divisional headquarters 3 months earlier. Despite Kira's specialized tracking expertise and familiarity with the local terrain, Morrison had limited her involvement to basic trail following rather than comprehensive scene analysis. Morrison's approach focused on the assumption that Martinez had been captured or killed by insurgent forces operating in the area. He directed search teams toward known enemy positions and ordered increased patrols in valleys where hostile activity had been reported, despite the lack of evidence supporting an enemy engagement scenario. The conflict deepened when Kira presented findings that contradicted the official theory. Her analysis of the terrain around Martinez's last known position showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of hostile presence, and track patterns that suggested he'd been walking calmly rather than under duress when he'd reached the cliff edge. Morrison dismissed her conclusions as speculation based on incomplete evidence, arguing that her tracking skills were suited for finding lost personnel rather than investigating potential security breaches. He'd expressed concerns that her personal relationship with Martinez was affecting her objectivity and causing her to overlook obvious signs of enemy activity. Other officers supported Morrison's position, pointing out that insurgent forces were known to operate in the area and that Martinez's disappearance fit the pattern of soldiers who'd been ambushed during routine patrols. They suggested that Kira's focus on physical evidence was preventing her from seeing the broader tactical picture. The most troubling aspect was Morrison's insistence that her investigation be limited to specific areas and time frames, preventing her from examining evidence that might contradict the official narrative about what had happened to Martinez. Standing at the cliff edge where Martinez's trail ended, Kira felt the weight of questions that didn't have acceptable answers. Her tracking experience told her that people didn't simply walk off cliffs, especially not experienced soldiers who understood terrain hazards and carried safety equipment. The boot prints she'd followed showed a consistent stride pattern that indicated Martinez had been walking normally, without the shortened steps or erratic direction changes that would suggest someone fleeing from pursuit or moving under stress. His trail led directly to the cliff edge in a straight line that seemed purposeful rather than accidental. What disturbed her most was the absence of evidence that should have been present if the official theory was correct. No shell casings, no blood, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that Martinez had tried to avoid or escape from hostile contact. The scene looked like someone had simply walked to the edge and vanished. Her grandfather had taught her that when physical evidence contradicted official explanations, the problem usually wasn't with the evidence, but with the people interpreting it. He'd warned her that sometimes the most dangerous situations occurred when telling the truth became more risky than accepting lies. The personal stakes were higher than just finding a missing soldier. Martinez had been working on something he'd called irregularities in supply manifests, inconsistencies that he'd mentioned to Kira during their last conversation, but hadn't had time to explain in detail. She closed her eyes and made the same promise. Her grandfather had taught her, follow the trail wherever it leads, even when you don't like where it's taking you. Kira's continued investigation revealed details that made the official theory increasingly impossible to support. Martinez's personal equipment was missing, including his radio and sidearm, but there were no signs of a struggle or forced removal. His trail showed that he'd approached the cliff deliberately, not as someone being pursued or coerced. More disturbing was what she found in Martinez's quarters during an authorized search: documentation related to supply shipments that didn't match official manifests, and notes suggesting he'd been tracking discrepancies in equipment allocations and personnel assignments. The papers were hidden in a way that indicated Martinez had been concerned about unauthorized access to his investigation. When Kira brought these findings to Morrison, his response was immediate and decisive. Martinez's personal papers were classified beyond her security clearance, and her involvement in the search operation was being terminated due to her inability to focus on relevant evidence rather than speculation about administrative matters. The situation escalated when Kira requested permission to examine areas beyond the authorized search zone, particularly a series of caves and hidden approaches that could explain how someone might have left the cliff area without leaving obvious tracks. Morrison not only refused the request, but ordered her to submit all physical evidence and cease any further investigation. Other soldiers began avoiding conversations with her, and she noticed increased surveillance of her activities and communications. The message was clear. Her investigation had uncovered something that powerful people wanted to remain hidden, and continuing to pursue the truth could have serious consequences for her career and safety. As evening approached, Kira faced the decision between accepting the official explanation and ending her investigation, or pursuing the truth about Martinez's disappearance, regardless of the personal cost. Kira made her choice during the sunset hour, when most personnel were occupied with evening duties. Using skills her grandfather had taught her about moving through terrain without leaving tracks, she returned to the cliff area with equipment Morrison had forbidden her to use, night vision gear and rope systems that would allow her to examine areas below the cliff edge. The descent was more dangerous than expected, but her rock climbing experience from Arizona mountains served her. Well, halfway down the cliff face, she discovered what she'd been looking for: a narrow ledge system that provided access to a series of caves invisible from the top of the cliff. Inside the largest cave, she found Martinez. He was alive, injured, and hiding from people he identified as members of his own unit, who'd been involved in stealing and reselling military supplies to local arms dealers. Martinez had discovered the theft operation and been planning to report it when he'd been forced to flee for his life during what was supposed to be a routine patrol. The truth was brutally simple. Martinez hadn't fallen or been captured by insurgents. He'd been targeted by soldiers in his own unit who were using their positions to steal equipment and weapons, then selling them to the same enemy forces they were supposed to be fighting against. His escape to the caves had been desperate improvisation when he'd realized that his own squad leader was part of the theft ring and had planned to kill him during the patrol to prevent him from exposing their operation. The footprints leading to the cliff edge had been deliberately created to suggest he'd fallen or jumped, while he'd actually used rappelling techniques to reach the hidden ledge system. Martinez's injuries were from a firefight with 3 soldiers from his unit who tried to eliminate him before he could report their activities. He'd been surviving in the cave for nearly 2 days, waiting for someone he trusted to find him. Kira's extraction of Martinez from the cave required careful coordination to avoid the soldiers who'd been hunting him. Using communication protocols her grandfather had taught her, she was able to contact base security through channels that bypassed the compromised chain of command and arrange for Martinez's safe evacuation. The investigation that followed revealed the extent of the supply theft operation. 6 soldiers, including a squad leader and supply sergeant, had been stealing equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and selling it through intermediaries to insurgent groups. Martinez's investigation had threatened to expose the entire network. Captain. Morrison's involvement became clear during the interrogation process. While not directly participating in the theft, he'd been aware of the irregularities and had worked to suppress Martinez's investigation rather than pursue it through proper channels. His efforts to limit Kira's search had been designed to prevent discovery of the cave system where Martinez was hiding. The transformation in how base leadership viewed Kira's tracking abilities was immediate and comprehensive. Her techniques for reading terrain and understanding human behavior became standard training for all reconnaissance personnel, and her methods for investigating suspicious disappearances were adopted as base-wide protocol. Within months, Kira had been promoted to the intelligence section with responsibility for training other soldiers in advanced tracking and investigation techniques. Her ability to follow evidence regardless of official pressure had prevented a cover-up that would have cost Martinez his life and allowed the theft operation to continue. The soldiers involved in the supply theft faced court-martial proceedings that resulted in prison sentences and dishonorable discharge. More importantly, the base implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar operations and established anonymous reporting channels for soldiers who discovered evidence of misconduct. Martinez returned to duty after medical treatment, but the experience had changed his perspective on military service and the importance of speaking up when something was wrong. He credited Kira's persistence and tracking skills with saving his life, but acknowledged that the real courage had been her willingness to pursue the truth when everyone in authority was telling her to stop looking. The cliff edge where his footprints had ended became a reminder for both of them that sometimes the most important trails are the ones that seem to lead nowhere, but actually lead to the truth that someone doesn't want you to find.